Where did we leave off at the last episode? Well, the darkness had lifted, and I left off with over 6 months, or well over 6 months, I think over a year in recovery. And I was in school and I was gainfully employed full time. I was now a very, very active and involved father. I did go through what would be my second divorce. That relationship and marriage, the total time would only last 2 years. I remember that being a difficult decision. I talk about that on the last episode. And so I left off with moving into my own place. I remember it well. It was a top floor in a house that was converted into two apartments, and I had the top floor. Anthony had his own room. I had my own space, and I had gotten into back into a job role that I didn't think would ever be possible again, because post meth days and crack days, I had now I was a convicted felon. And I remember this was a moment in time in my recovery that really showed me the power of change. It showed me the power of, to what I say is, keep moving forward, no matter what. And I have it journaled. I just read one journal where I was going through a tough time, and I said, first and foremost, do not drink and use. Doing that, and then doing other things. I have it journaled. I was seeing a counselor even well after I got out of treatment both times, and I was healing. But I was doing the right things and the next indicated things in positive ways. And if you've been following this story of my life, I had previously, post-military, I worked in retail loss prevention. And I really loved that work. I was really good at it. But post-meth days, post-darkness years, I'm now a convicted felon. So I just didn't, even consider it as an option. Well, my brother-in-law at the time, Vern, he was working for Fred Meyer. He was a loss prevention manager. And I remember talking to him about it and how cool it was. And inside, I was like, I felt bad and envious a bit because I couldn't do that. Here I am a convicted felon, but I wasn't letting it stop me from doing things. I was in school to be a counselor. I was working full time as a cook, and I'll never forget Vern calling me. This is in 97. He calls me and he says, hey, I have a part-time position at my store. He was at Fred Meyer in Lakewood, the old Fred Meyer in Lakewood. It's no longer there, but he was working at that store, and he says, and I think you should apply. I'm like, Vern, hello, I'm a convicted felon. One of those felonies being second-degree burglary. He's like, well, yeah, I was just over a year sober. He says, well, my boss, Kevin Roof, who is someone I consider to be a friend to this day, but I didn't know him at all at this time. He said, my boss, who's the district manager, he's a pretty open guy. I can get you an interview. And what do you got to lose? And I was like, oh, interesting. Well, I was working. I didn't need the job. I was already working. I was in school, so I had stuff going on, and it really just hit my brain. I'm like, all right, get me an interview. So he got me an interview. I'm pretty sure it was him and Kevin that were there, and met Kevin, really nice guy. And I just kind of told a bit of my story, where I was at in life, and a little bit about where I'd been, and then my experience and what I could bring to the table. And I'll never forget, he listened very intently, and he said, hey, you know what? What you're doing is amazing. Good for you for turning your life around. But with just a year in recovery, I'm not willing to go to my boss yet. And I'm like, okay, well, why am I here? He says, but if in a year from now, you are kind of in the same place and we have an opening, apply again. If everything's, still the same and you're doing good things. Long story short, about a year later, Vern calls me. He was still at the Lakewood store, and he says, I have a part-time position. Do you want me to call Kevin? And I was still in school and still working. I think I was at the Tacoma Mall, or maybe I ended up managing a store at the Tacoma Mall called The Locker Room. I was really good at it. I did really well. My brother had got me that job. Anyway, and I said, yeah, give him a call. So here I am, and kind of knocking on Kevin's door. It's a year later. I'm still in recovery. I'm still doing the same positive stuff. And he went, at the time, Fred Meyer was owned by Fred Meyer. This is pre-Kroger buyout day. And Scott Bringhurst was the vice president of loss prevention. He took it all the way to the top and got it approved. And I got hired at Fred Meyer as a loss prevention specialist. That was a really positive experience for me to see that, one, that someone was willing to look beyond my past and really look at the progress I had been making, and that recovery does work and lives do change, and the world is my oyster, so to speak, that I could do amazing things. So I started part-time, and I liked it. They had a great loss prevention program. They were all in on risk management, loss prevention, and safety and all that, and I liked it. And that actually would end up being my career from 98, I think January of 98, until about 04. And it was great. So that had happened. So I was working at Fred Meyer. I had gotten my own place. And at Fred Meyer, I met a girl. And this would be what I call Stephanie number 2. She worked in the shoe department at Fred Meyer that I was working at. Excuse me. And we started talking. And that talking would turn into this is 98 and probably 05, 06. Oh, wait, it would be, I think we finally gave it our last go, we did, in 07. And then by the end of 07, we finally said that we've tried all we can try. And then we separated for good. But that would be that long of a relationship, nearly 10 years with her. So I meet her, we start dating. My relationship issues were still, I was improving, but I still wasn't making healthy decisions. I would start, interesting, about the same time or right before I met Stephanie, I was talking to and having an affair with another married woman. Not a good decision. Terrible, terrible decision making. But I would end up, I've never realized this before, you guys. Just like the previous with Sue, I would end up going, seeing the married woman's not a good thing. I would much prefer see this person who's single and available. And so I would turn mine and Stephanie's dating into a serious relationship. So that's where we are. And I turned it into a career. I decided to stop going to school. I had darn near pretty close to earned an associate's degree for drug and alcohol counseling. I had done a little bit of an internship, but when I got the job at Fred Meyer and the opportunity to go full time, I had to make a decision. Was I going to make the Fred Meyer gig, a career? Or was I going to go into the counseling arena? And I made the decision to go all in with Fred Meyer. And I was good. I was really good, obviously, right? One, I had experience doing this job before, but two, I had been in the place of, knowing what to look for when it comes to criminal behavior. So I was really good at it. I excelled. And I have some journal entries that I'd like to read, some short ones. They're not real long. From the same journal that I have that has journal entries going all the way back to 1994, and journal entries actually in this hardbound, one you write in journal all the way up to 2022, and I might even have one or two. But this is where we are. May of 98. Time seems as though it is on a fast course. It's hard to believe this year is near half over. Life is going well right now. And I read this, and this was good for me to remember. I still am going to counseling, which is helping me to learn how to live life on life's terms. I encourage anyone in recovery to go to a counselor, to see a therapist. Treatment is great, but treatment, in my view, for me, for sure, was not enough. I needed ongoing therapy, literally for years after counseling, to heal from my childhood trauma, to learn how to have healthy behaviors. It's actually through counseling that I would learn skills to manage my anxiety, to learn to be a better person in a relationship, to make healthier decisions, to be a better employee at an employer. So counseling's always good for me. And this is where I have it. So this is that May 1st of 98. I'm enjoying being back in loss prevention. And I do read after this, I'm still struggling with depression. I still struggle at times with fatigue and insecure feelings, but they're a lot better than they used to be. I believe in myself now more than ever. And this is where I'm on my own. June 10th of that same year, 98, life is either changing. I'm on my own again. I made a decision to stop the continuous cycle of pain that was in mine and Sue's marriage. While I'm hurt that it is over, I have a lot of release of frustration since I've left. I like my new place and so far am enjoying being on my own. I need to be really careful about getting into another relationship. Dating is okay, but I need to be okay with me for a while. That's that June of 98. So this is a time period, and I just remember this was a really positive, forward-moving time for me. I was struggling with worry and anxiety and depression, but I also was going to counseling. I was talking to my doctor about it. I would try different medication along the way. And it was good. Here I am. My recovery date at this time was February 21st of 96. So I'm over 2 years in recovery. I was spending time with family. I had friends I was spending time with. I was exercising. Money was a struggle, but not nearly what it used to be. I was still learning how to manage my money. And again, that's one thing I'm grateful for Sue from my second marriage, is she helped me a lot in that realm. In fact, it's in this time period that I get my license back for the first time in 3 or 4 years. When you lose your license, when your license gets suspended, it costs money to get it back. And one of the first things you end up having to do is pay your tickets, and before you can get your license back. At least that's how it used to be. And I was chipping away at them. And I'm forever grateful for Bob Jones, my ex-father-in-law, my son's grandfather. I'll never forget, him and I always stayed connected long after me and Cindy divorced. We would be friends. They were family to me. And I'll never forget him saying, and he was Bob, he's like, meet me down at Puget Sound Bank. This is when it was Puget Sound Bank. I'm like, okay, so I go down there, and he co-signed on a loan for me to pay off what I had remaining on my tickets, which was about $2,000, so I could get my license back. That was huge for me, because that's a significant barrier, right? If you're doing all the right things, well, you need to get to work. And I was riding the bus and I was doing all those things, but was I also driving when I shouldn't have been? Yeah, because I had to get to places. Funny thing though, I never got pulled over because I was being responsible. I wasn't driving like an idiot, blah, blah, blah. But I got my license back in this period of time. I'll never forget. Because it had been so long since I had it, I had to do the written test and the driving test. And I took it, I think it was out in Parkland where I took it. Maybe it was a DMV office out there. And I'll never forget doing the driving test. And I was just like a kid. I was so excited. And the driver instructor guy, he's like, wow, you're really... I'm like, yeah, it's been a while. I'm super excited. Got my license back. Having been a convicted felon, I also remember facing significant barriers. Going backwards a little bit, me and Sue, when we were together, we wanted to move into these nice apartments in Sumner. And as a convicted felon, and this is the same with jobs and getting a place to live in employment, you have to check that box, right? And well, I checked the box and I just, put a little synopsis of what happened and to get this apartment. And I remember, we were kind of really excited to get it. The couple was really nice that was managing it. And so they had given us the application, so we fill it out. And then it was crickets. Not a peep. We didn't get a phone call back. We didn't hear anything. And so it was close to where we were currently living. So I stopped over at the manager's office where they lived. And she would barely open the door. I'll never forget it. I felt like just less than nothing. She would barely open the door to give me the time of day. I had changed my life. I was a whole different person from what I was when I did those crimes, but that's what you're faced with as a convicted felon. So one of two things I can say: kids, don't do drugs so you don't do crime, so you don't end up a convicted felon. Also, criminal justice reform. We need to help people who have turned their lives around to keep that positive momentum forward. So that was a barrier, and it's the same with jobs. I was fortunate for the Kevin Roofs of the world who were willing to, listen to me beyond an application, beyond a checkbox, and have a conversation and give me a chance. So, it's funny too. It's a lot easier to do these podcasts talking about the lighter side of my life. It wasn't all perfect by any means. But man, it was certainly so much better. And I just felt a lot of lightness in a lot of ways for my future, by doing a very simple but big thing by saying, you know what, drugs and alcohol, I've given you a lot of my life. And to that, point in 96, I had been drinking and using from 12 years old all the way to 29. And I probably heard this along the way, and I say this to people now. I had given drugs and alcohol my all for a long period of time. And so I made the decision, in that February of 96, and then when I went back to treatment for the second time, and from that point forward, to, you know what? I'm going to give my all to recovery. I'm going to do whatever it takes, one, to not drink and use, and two, to improve my life, to turn things around. And it is a lot of work. It's not, I always tell people, life is still life. Anyone in recovery that's been in recovery for any amount of time will tell you, we learn pretty quickly after that. They call it the pink cloud of early recovery. Early recovery, it's like, wow, I'm not going to jail. Oh my gosh, I'm physically feeling better. Whoa, I got a job, right? People want to talk to me again, all of those things. And that dissipates because life still happens. Well, I still had the massive weight of financial destruction. I had to treat all of my mental health stuff. I had to repair relationships. I had to do a lot of work, right? And that takes time. So, back to where I was. So in just looking through my journal, I want to go to, where do I start? It's been over a year. Oh, here we go. So this is November of 99, and it says it's been over a year since I wrote in here. And it says, where do I start? It has been over a year since I wrote Way Too Long. Me and Stephanie are still together. We have been through good and bad, and we are still trying. I'm seeing a new counselor. That's good to hear, because I needed it. To continue being well. Tyler is doing great. I'm possibly going to attempt to get custody of him. Yes, Brad. I remembered his name, you guys. Cindy is still allowing him to be around drugs and crime. Brad was the guy's name that she was with for a while, and he was still active addiction. If you remember back a couple episodes during the darkness, I brought up a guy. I couldn't remember his name. It was Brad. Good guy, but he was in active addiction, right? I used with him. Well, that was continuing. He was not in recovery. And that was really frustrating to now, being in recovery, see my son going through. I could see it clearly, the damage that it was having with him being around it. Trying to move up, it has turned out to be quite the process. This is my role at Fred Meyer. I wanted to become a loss prevention manager, which I would end up doing. Me and Stephanie are still learning to communicate, and I'm hoping for the best. So, so me and Stephanie and 99, I'm wondering if we had moved yet to Puyallup. Because if I'm remembering right, her and I moved in together. She moved in with me in my apartment on Park Avenue. It was right off of 64th and Park Avenue in Tacoma. And then we moved, I remember the blue house. We moved out to this big, no. Here we go. We moved into a townhouse right behind blue house that actually comes later. We moved to Puyallup into a townhouse that was bigger. It was roomier, and it had a little backyard, and it was nice. I remember the friends we had, the neighbors we had there. And so we were, this 99 era kind of time period. We were navigating our relationship. And when I say navigating our relationship, we struggled with communication. Stephanie had been through a lot with abuse from her mother, and then abuse from her son's father. She has a son named Nick, and it would be in Puyallup where, because we would have Nick and Tyler. Tyler still remembers hanging out with Nick. She would get him every other weekend. The dad had full custody. I don't know how he ever got full custody, but he did. And I don't think it was anything formal. But alas, I said alas, Megan. I hope you hear that. I'm trying to say it less. That's just one time in this episode. So she had a lot of her own stuff that she was starting to address. She was going to counseling. I was going to counseling for my stuff. So both of us were navigating, improving our lives. And with that comes, struggle. It was tough. And I was the one that, I was like, I want to talk about it. Let's figure it out. And I remember she would just clam up. She was really hard for her to talk. And, looking back now, I have a lot of sympathy for her and empathy and understanding, because it was a really difficult time for her. She was working for Fred Meyer still. We were just at different stores because I was in a loss prevention role. We couldn't work at the same store. So I'm pretty sure she was, I don't remember where she was. We did work at the Puyallup store for a while together. Anyway, so we moved into a townhouse in Puyallup. My mom, I don't remember if she was in Spokane yet or not, or if she was still with Ed. At some point, my mom leaves Ed. He moves out for good. This guy, he ended up dying an alcoholic, purely alcohol-related death. Cirrhosis of the liver. He would be found in a motel in Portland. I remember because my mom got the call. Really sad, probably painful death. But mom would leave him, and she would end up meeting a guy and moving to Spokane. I don't know how she ended up meeting a guy that lived in Spokane, but she did. So here we are. Let me go to another period. I just got home from work. Me and Stephanie are struggling. This is 2000, right? I remember, the ticking of the clock. Is the world going to end in 2000? Well, it didn't. It was fine. Here we go. This was a really, really cool time. This is May 8th of 2000. Today is filled with the feeling of accomplishment. I was promoted to loss prevention manager. I completed a long-term goal I set for myself 2 years ago. I truly believe in myself today. I know through hard work, patience, and the willingness to keep moving forward, I can accomplish whatever I set out to do. I thank God for my sobriety, Tyler, Stephanie, and all the others who have helped get me to where I am today. And I hope Kevin Roof listens to this, because I'm appreciative. I'm still grateful to him for giving me the opportunity. Vern for giving me the opportunity. And, Kevin really mentored me in a lot of ways. He would help me become a good manager. He would help me with communication and all those things. My first store, because as a manager, you get assigned a store. I would fill in at some stores until a store opened up, and I would end up getting the Midway store. It's the Fred Meyer up near the airport on Pacific Highway. And I would commute. So we would end up moving from that townhouse to what I said earlier was a blue house. It was a big blue house. It was more than what we needed, but we're like, oh yeah, let's move into a bigger house. It was a little cramped in the townhouse. I think at the time, I know, she was wanting to try to get Nick full time. His dad was a piece of work. He was abusive. It was crazy. And I, at the time, was considering trying to get Anthony full time, because he was continuing to be exposed to chaos and active addiction with Brad and Cindy's dysfunction. So I think that was probably part of the reason. And we had a good relationship with the landlords. They owned the blue house and they owned the complex behind it. This is also a time when my brother, Bob, I mentioned, I think in the last episode, that his second marriage ending was really devastating for him. Really, really hard for him. It was the first time in my life I really saw my brother get vulnerable in a way that I had never seen before. He would live with us for a little bit. His whole life changed drastically. This is early 2000s now, 2000, 99, 2000, 2001. And he went from, having what I think he viewed as a great life, living in Seattle and hustling and moving and doing all these things with Kristen, and they had goals and dreams, and then it was all gone. And so he had gotten a DUI. I remember that. And so he was ordered to go to meetings. I remember going to a couple meetings with him. His whole appearance, he changed his appearance. And I had my dog Cody. He loved my dog Cody. He was a big old Rottweiler Malamute, just a gentle giant. Him and Stephanie got along well. They had a good friendship. I remember my insecurities, they were pretty strong in this period of time. And I thought, he was going to try to get Stephanie to cheat on me with him. It was like, oh God, David. And then a shift would happen. Pretty significant shift. I remember getting the call from Cindy saying that she was moving. I think by now she had left Brad, and she had finally left Brad. She was working as an optometrist assistant. She was trying to work toward being an optometrist, I can say the word. And she got a job opportunity. I'm like, oh, cool. Where at? And she said, you ready for this? Now, I'm a Tacoma boy, city boy. That's Cindy. She had lived in the Pierce County area her whole life. And she says, it's in Yakima. Wow. Yeah, that was like, I'm like, are you kidding? You can't be serious. You're not going to take my son clear across the state. For me, to that point, I'd only been over the mountains as a kid to visit grandparents who lived in Natchez a couple times. I didn't know what was over here. I live in Ellensburg now. And she says, yep, I'm moving. My parents are moving with me. And I'm like, oh my. It really rocked my world. It was devastating for me because I was a very involved dad. I would go to my son's school events until, of course, they required me to do a background check. And then I had been going there for a long time. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, we need you to fill out a volunteer background check. And then all of a sudden I couldn't go anymore. Another barrier. I had completely changed. Anyway, so she moved. That was hard. That was really, really hard. And so doing what I did in life, again, I'm in recovery. I'm like, well, I've got to figure this out. I want to be there for my son. So we started, I would go over there once a month, drive over there. I don't know that she ever brought him this way, but I did what I did to see my son. Then Kevin, my district manager, he called me somewhere in 2000, and I don't have that journal anywhere. I wonder if I was journaling somewhere else at this time. But anyway, he calls me and he says, David, your son moved to Yakima, didn't he? I'm like, yeah, Kevin, you know that. Don't be a jerk. And he's like, well, he says, we're opening a store in Ellensburg. And I said, and I quote, where's Ellensburg? He says, well, it's just an hour or less from Yakima. And being in retail loss prevention with Fred Meyer at the time, if you wanted to grow, this is kind of the retail management environment. If you want to grow, you got to go. You got to move. You got to move around. So I had been at the store I'd gotten for well over a year by this point, and it was a okay store, but it was kind of a boring store. It had a decent amount of external theft, but not a lot of internal anyway, and it was a smaller store. So he's like, you can get the experience of opening a new store, go into a remote area, that'd look really good for future opportunities, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, I gotta think about this. He says, why don't you take a drive over there, check it out. All right, fine. Now, Stephanie, when she was younger, she used to have horses. I remember her talking about them, and, well, Ellensburg is a horsey town. So she was kind of excited. And it's also, gosh, I wonder if I have this journal somewhere that I'm just not finding it. But her and I were, like I said, we were having some struggles. And she almost didn't come with me. But we went over there. I had my Ford Ranger pickup truck. And I remember driving over there. And I'll never forget the first time I drove down what is now University Way, coming into town. And going, oh boy, this is a whole different world over here. Like, oh wow, can I do this? And so I ended up, because I wanted to be closer to my son, because I wanted to have opportunities in my career path, I ended up saying yes. And we ended up saying yes. But she almost, we would do the breakup thing, break up, get back together, break up, and she almost didn't come with me. The first place I found to live, it's still there, and I'm grateful to Dave Camarada for being willing to rent to me kind of sight unseen, because I had to get a place pretty fast. The store was scheduled to open in June of 2001, and all the management team needed to be on site by April 1st of that year. And so I had this big, large dog, and a lot of places don't want to take dogs. So the only place I could find was a little tiny duplex, little one-bedroom duplex on Water Street. It's right on 15th and Water, or 14th and Water. And we moved over, and I helped open Fred Meyer in Ellensburg, and this would begin my journey in Ellensburg. I do need to talk about my biological father, and then I'm going to close this one up. So if you remember the episode where I do an internet search in 96, when I got in recovery, it wasn't long after. It was probably late 96, early 97. I got on the computer, probably AOL, and I wanted to have confirmation of this Danny Douglas guy that was on my birth certificate. I was using his last name now. I had to legally because that's what was on my Social Security card and that was on my birth certificate. And I had found him, and he and I would actually maintain a relationship for the most part until he passes in, and you would think I would know this, but I want to say, has it been 10 years? It feels like it's been about 10 years. I have pictures now and copies of him. I'm grateful that I found him. And I think I said this in an episode. The day he walked into that Subway and I was working, I knew who my real father was. And I would, in counseling, I know I talked a lot about my struggle with how could he, have just abandoned me. But I tried my best to work through it. So, I would say we had a good friendship. And I brought that up because going over to see Tyler on a couple occasions before we actually moved to Ellensburg, I remember borrowing his van, and me and Stephanie would come over and sleep in his van. He had kind of a old school, like 90s custom van. But he would remain a part of my life. I would have times where just my struggle with him not being there when I was a kid would just be too much. And he was always receptive to my views. He never once was like, well, screw you too. If you don't want to talk to me, I won't. He was never like that. I believe he had truly changed his life. Because he didn't drink. He had said he had quit drinking. He was liked. Everyone that I met that knew him liked him. I believe that he had turned his own life around. And so we had a really good bond through electronics. He and I would build computers together, talk about all the massive changes that were happening in this time period of technology. Would continue to be a part of my life until he passed. So I'm going to close this one up with that right about there. We're in Ellensburg, and so the next episode we'll start going through my time in Ellensburg, which has now been crazy to think. It's been 24 years that I've been in Ellensburg. And if you don't know by now, this is my recovery month. That date of February 21st, 1996 would change. I returned to use in 2006 for a short period of time, about 6 months. And now my recovery date is March 25th of 2007. So this is my anniversary month. And it's great that it wasn't planned that my podcast this month is all about recovery. I'll probably get to that about 6 month window of active use in 2006, 2007, that it was pretty chaotic. It was pretty crazy. But outside of that, it's all my life in recovery. And I think that's fitting that, the stars have aligned, the universe has spoken, God has says, whatever you're going to use, that during this month of March, when it's my anniversary month, I'll celebrate 18 years on the 25th. I'm talking about my life in recovery. If you're out there and you're listening to this and you're struggling, don't give up hope. You too can do the same things I've done. I always say I'm nobody special. I'm just a kid from the streets of Tacoma who was given access to resources along the way and have been able to navigate a pretty amazing life to where I am today. I also say I'm not the smartest guy in the room. One thing I have that I believe people in recovery have, maybe more than some, is stick-to-itiveness, the ability to just keep thriving, the ability to just keep trudging, the ability to say, I'm going to find a way. And I hope you find your way. Love to all.